Thanks for joining us on another We Talk to Smart People episode of Construction Tech Talk right here on Iron Pros. Why do we call them that? Well, we call them that because we talk to smart people. And today we've got Jonathan Gross of Pemeco. Jonathan is one of these folks who is a software selection an implementation expert. He's an attorney, and he's one of my longtime emotional support Canadians. So, Jonathan, why don't you fill folks in on what it is that you do in life as we know it?
Thanks for having me. It's wonderful to be here on Iron Pro. So we're in the business of helping clients who work for professional service firms, things like construction engineering firms, product companies, so building suppliers, fabricators and installers, really help get their business organized for the future. So we'll come in and study their business and help them figure out how to implement their business processes, what software to implement. We'll help them negotiate the contracts with the technology vendors and then make sure that the implementations get deployed successfully. So this is just a wonderful forum. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the C word, the contract word. And generally you might have a pretty good idea what you're buying in any given situation, but then you might look at a contract and realize, well, am I buying really what I thought I would? And this is something where I'm really excited to get your input because we have a lot of contractors, building team leadership organizations that are really rolling out technology across the enterprise, perhaps for the first time. Perhaps they're moving away from legacy on-premise applications to cloud-based multi-tenant software as a service. And so maybe you can give folks an idea as they go in this direction with this type of technology, what should they look at in that contract and what types of things do they watch out for, either to mitigate risk or just to figure out if they're really getting what they want?
It's a really good question. And if you think about the types of applications that people are going out to buy in this industry, it could be project management software. It could be integrating accounting and project management software like an ERP system. It could be customer relationship management. It could be engineering design software. These are really critical business applications that are going to control your business processes, that are going to handle your data. And boy, if you're going to think about outsourcing the heartbeat of your company to one of these providers, you're probably well advised to dig into the details contractually to know what your rights and obligations are. The devil is always in the detail, and these contracts are detailed. And so if you are going to outsource the heartbeat of your company, I'm going to suggest you take a good look at it. Chuck, I'm happy to dig into things that companies may want to look for.
Yeah, I was hoping that you'd be doing exactly that. So, why don't you share some things where you think that there might be risks that folks may want to be aware of and mitigate? And maybe the contract is going to give them an idea of whether or not they're really getting multi-tenant software as a service or something else entirely.
Let's hit that second point first. We'll walk through the structure of the contracts in a minute, but that's really, really important. So, you go through all of this marketing and sales process with a technology vendor, and they're saying, I'm going to sell you my cloud system or the right to use my cloud system. But the question you're asking is this really the cloud solution as it's marketed? Is it truly a multi-tenant software as a service application? Well, the contracts will probably be the first indication as to whether or not that's the case. And so things you may want to look for are who's hosting the software? Is it rapidly scalable? Are you perhaps being asked to sign many, many different agreements, one with a software provider, one with a database provider, and a third one with the company that's hosting? And those could be indicators that maybe the commercial relationship isn't what's being marketed. And that's important for you because if you are signing multiple agreements, there's this gray area that sits in the interstitial tissue between the different relationships. So if you think about it, you're signing a software contract and then you're going to sign a database contract. What happens if there's a problem between the database and the software? Do the two vendors kind of go like this and point their fingers at each other? Well, one of the benefits of buying SaaS is the idea, of course, is that you're dealing with one business partner and they manage the relationship up and down the stack. So if you're signing three, it does create potential risk.
Yeah, yeah. So even if you're signing, yeah, a single agreement, are there responsibilities with regards to like upgrades or regression testing or other things that also ought to give you an indication of what you're buying?
Yeah, I mean, so again, who bears the responsibility? So when you think of software as a service, you're not buying something that you could put onto your balance sheet. You're subscribing to a service. And so the vendor should be responsible for maintaining the software. And they should be providing it in a way that allows them to provide routine updates. And in fact, that's probably part of the value proposition is that, you know what, they're continually keeping the software evergreen. So you get the latest and greatest as they enhance it. You're getting the benefit of this environment that's rapidly elastic and scalable, so that if you need more computing power, well, that's on them. You don't have to worry about acquiring more services or servers, services, capacity, compute, things like that. So again, the details of the contract will enlighten you as to what you're acquiring. Things that are important to put your eyes on might be, are you getting your own tenant? So is it your own instance of the application, or is it something that's shared? Do you have to take updates within a certain period, or can you deploy them when you see fit? Those are just a few clues.
So let's say you walk into like the function room of a big conference center and you got your laptop with you. You go up to the podium and you plug into a projector and you see the people out there at the round tables, with the white tablecloths and the waiters are coming up to take away the rest of the rubber chicken lunch they had and they're all looking at you because you're about to talk about understanding the terms and conditions of construction software. What are you going to be talking about?
I'm going to be saying, look, you're going to be presented with somewhere between 6, 10, 15 pages of legalese that could have a big impact on what the vendor's obligations are, what your rights are, what they're delivering. I'm going to tell you, you better pay close attention. And the question, of course, you're going to ask is, what am I looking for? Well, if you take all of that legalese and say, I'm going to break it down into chunks and I'm going to really assess what my rights are, what my exposure is, what the vendor's rights are, what their exposure is, first thing I'm going to look at is I'm going to look at software use rights and obligations. Okay. This is going to define what I'm allowed to do in the software and what I'm not allowed to do and what the vendor is obligated to do. It's really, really important. So if you're a big construction engineering firm, for example, and you got a lot of affiliates and subsidiaries and numbered companies that may want to benefit from this thing, things you might want to look at are which other parties can benefit from the agreement. So if I sign it up here, can an affiliate use it? Can a related company that's not directly controlled use it? Very, very important. May also define what you're not allowed to do with it. Well, you might not be allowed to charge another company fees and you manage the service on their behalf. That's a service bureau thing and that would be out of scope. So software use rights and obligations define very clearly what you can and cannot do with the software and who can use it. And if you go offside those use rights and obligations, well, the vendor has oftentimes reserve the right to suspend your access or terminate it. So you've got to understand those. Next thing, of course, everyone wants to know the commercial terms. What am I paying? What am I getting? How long is this thing valid for? That's really, really important in a SaaS or a cloud-based relationship because, well, you're going to be paying for it year after year after year. So can the vendor jack up the price on you in year 2 or year 3? Are you going to negotiate limits on how much they can increase the price? What other important commercial terms are there? How often do you have to pay them? Is this an annual in advance thing? Are you paying for it monthly? What happens if you dispute an invoice? So really understanding the commercial terms is important because it's going to define what your financial obligations are. If you want to add 10 more users, 100 more users, well, is that at the protected negotiated price? Or is it going to be at the list price at the end of the term? How much of your data are they allowed to use? What are warranties around this thing? What happens if I turn it on and, my project management module just doesn't work? I can't record time to a project activity. Well, who's on the hook for what? So do they have to respond to you within 2 hours, 4 hours? So again, really wrapping your minds around the vendor rights and obligations is important. So we've covered 3 categories, Chuck. We've covered the software use rights and obligations. We've covered commercial terms. We covered vendors' rights and obligations. Now we're going to get into something that's really important. We're going to talk about data protection. We're going to talk about intellectual property. So you're going to be putting stuff in the system that is probably got confidential information. It may have information of your customers in it. And if you're, dealing with perhaps development of residential communities, well, it may have ultimately consumer data residing in the application, maybe even payment data if you're using a software application that takes deposits on, new buildings, things like that. What happens if there's a breach of data protection obligations and there's a cybersecurity event and all of a sudden your customer's data is exposed and your customer's now going to sue you? Well, is the vendor on the hook to cover you in that lawsuit, or are you going to be on the hook for something perhaps that they've done wrong? So really, really understanding that. And so that's kind of the fourth area that's really important. In a SaaS world, it's something you really, really want to be careful about because you want to make sure that you're well protected in the event that something goes wrong and it's not your fault. Terms that fall into that risks and liabilities category, the limitation of liability that defines who's on the hook for what types of breach and for how much. Indemnification, so who's responsible for making the other party whole in the event that there's some type of breach.
Yeah, I was kind of wondering about that because in some cases you might have a smaller company where it's like, sure, it's an enterprise system, but the dollars involved each month might not be that big. But if there is an issue, if there's a performance problem, it is kind of serious. So for that business. So, is the ability to negotiate something that kicks in more as you get to like a certain number of dollars, or how does that work?
It depends. This is a question of relative bargaining power, right? And so we've negotiated on behalf of small clients that are really attractive to certain vendors because they've got great brand cachet, or maybe it's a foray into a new industry that vendor doesn't serve, but they want to grow into. And so that even a small company will have bargaining power there. There are other cases where, yeah, if you're the small fish, your bargaining power is going to be a little bit limited. So maybe you want to be a little bit disciplined about the things you go after because the vendor may not have the inclination to spend all of this time negotiating legal. So you may want to just focus on the few things that are really, really important. Of course, bigger companies have more leverage, but again, understand your leverage. Try to take a best guess at the relative bargaining position as between you and the vendor and make an informed decision as to how you want to approach it.
Well, that I think is an excellent primer, and you and I will be taking deeper dives into this here on Iron Pros, and we'll make sure to have you again because it's certainly true that even if you read the terms and conditions, it doesn't matter if you don't understand the terms and conditions. So thanks so much, man.
Pleasure being here, Chuck, as always.